This is Perry Marshall. I am here with Dov Baron, and Dov has a great podcast called The Dov Baron Show. And he and I have met up several times, and long before that, had a bunch of great conversations, both on Dov's podcasts as well as offline, just problem solving. We were together at a conference in LA a few months ago, and I said, "Hey, wait a minute. I've never interviewed Dov. Dov has a lot of interesting things to say. There's a few of our listeners who have encountered Dov because we did a interview with Azra Raza last year. I did a special event, and Dov was one of the people in the audience, and he probably asked the best questions of anybody in the room. He is an expert on how humans behave and in his own very particular way. And he's into curiosity, which he defines as really love itself. It's the most virtuous thing in the universe. And Dove comes to mind particularly at this time because we're in a very tumultuous political environment, not only in the United States, but in the world. I've often said that it almost seems as though the people in evolutionary biology invented cancel culture and then it spread everywhere. And Dove is one of those people who's working to unwind that. So I decided to sit down with Dove today and see where our conversation goes. And Dove Baron, welcome to Evolution 2.0.
Thanks so much, Perry. Always love having conversations with you, mate. I know that whatever we talk about, it will add value and it will broaden my understanding because every time I have a conversation with you, I learn something, and I'm always extremely grateful for that. I love your personal level of curiosity and how you bring that to what you do, and it's made you in very many ways like me in that you're a polymath, one who I have enormous amounts of respect for. So thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
So let's talk about curiosity. Curiosity is your
Hmm.
is your favorite topic.
It
So
is.
give us the Dove Baron definition of curiosity and why it's the master virtue of all virtues.
I think when we think about curiosity, if you say to somebody, "Are you curious?" they'll always say yes because they can ask a question, right? If you ask a question, you think you're curious. No, most people's version of curiosity is actually a way to validate something they already believe. They're asking a question with the intent of getting an answer that fulfills their bias. And so we think about curiosity as questions and answers, but that's not curiosity. That's being questioning. When you are curious, it's a deepening of the understanding with the willingness to be wrong. And very much that's the premise of real science is skepticism, but it's a joyous skepticism rather than the negative sort of perception we have of skepticism. So it's like, oh, tell me more about that. I want to understand. So if I say to you, and you and I have had this conversation, what is your faith? And you say, I'm a Christian, I'm going to say, well, tell me about why that is. And you and I have had hours and hours and hours of conversations about that, which have been beautiful and enlightening and magnificent. And I'm still not a Christian, right? It didn't change
Yeah.
my faith, but it
Right.
deepens my understanding of you and
Mhm.
totally have a complete respect for where you're coming from. So for me, curiosity is a way for us to see each other beyond the framework of the rigidity of the identity of who we see ourselves and others as. So I can, if I'm really going to be curious, I have to be in a state of love because I have to be willing to say, yeah, that's not you. What's underneath that? Or what's underneath that? What's underneath that? And guess where I get back to every single time is when we get all the shit out of the way, it's love. It's love. Every philosophy, every religion I've studied, all of those things that I've studied, it always comes back to love. And so, when I look at, my study of history and politics, up until recently, I've always believed that everybody who got into politics, not everybody, but the majority of people who got into politics did so because they believed they wanted to make a positive difference. You know, I was not a fan of Ronald Reagan, but I believed with all my heart that Ronald Reagan believed he was helping America. I was not a fan of Margaret Thatcher, but I definitely believed that she felt like what she was doing was right for the country and she was driven to make a difference. Now, I may have politically disagreed with those people, but I could fundamentally agree with the fact that they wanted to make a positive difference. And so, what I get down to with people who are not got some psychological issues is that generally speaking, people are good. They want to do something positive. And if I can get past that, then I can get past whether you're wearing a red hat or a blue hat because it's irrelevant.
So if we're going to have a conversation and you're really going to be curious, that means your desire to learn has to exceed the fear that you have of what might be threatening in that conversation, or if that conversation is going to change your identity in some unforeseen way.
I would take it a step further. I would say I have to be willing to confront everything I've held as true as the possibility of it not being. I'm fully willing to discover that I'm absolutely wrong. I'm kind of excited if you can show me something where I had a perception of me and then it's like, well, that's not who I am. Like, wow, that's exciting. Like, I've learned something. I did not know that. That is very cool.
When's the first time that you had the experience of doing that and it was rewarding?
Well, I think I've always been some level of curious, particularly as a child, but I definitely knew that that was not a safe thing to be as a child. I think what the first experience of it was in watching James Burke's show called Connections. And you and I have talked about this. And I interviewed him. I got to interview him on my show. And it was like, I was so excited because I called him the godfather of my curiosity because he explained how different things were connected. And that was like so enriching for me, even as a kid. I mean, I was a boy, but it made me realize that these ideas I had about my world were really restrictive. I had the same thing when I walked into the living room as a 10-year-old and saw my mom crying while watching TV and said, "What's the matter?" And she pointed at the TV as she's crying. I'm pushing her glasses up and she says, "He's dead." I look at the TV. I have no idea who she's talking about. There's a man on TV. I don't know who he is. I've never seen him before. And then I listen and he says, "I have a dream that one day," and I'm blown away by the fact that my white, Jewish, poor English mother is weeping for a black Christian minister who lives on the other side of the world from a boy's point of view. That level of impact for me, that shattered my reality of that I'm living in this tiny little framework and that's all there is. That was incredibly rewarding for me because it was catalyzing for me, because through that I learned about Gandhi and learned about peaceful resistance and I learned about that this has got nothing to do with religion or color and everything to do with touching hearts and souls and uplifting human beings.
Wow, you just sent me on a trip right there.
You look like you went somewhere.
I did. I did. You know, when I went down the Evolution 2.0 rabbit hole, we talked about this on one of your podcasts. I was terrified. It's like, I might be ripping apart my entire belief system, and I don't know where this is going to take me, but I have faith that it's better to pursue the truth than to resist it. So here we go.
But do you recognize how phenomenally rare that is, Perry? Like, you probably don't recognize it because it's you, right? But it's extraordinarily rare. So
Yeah.
for because I was in LA speaking about the emotional source code,
Yes.
right? And the emotional source code at its central hub is identity. The identity we build in order to survive the lunatic asylum called our childhood. And I don't say that because about anybody in particular, is because all childhood is a lunatic asylum that you've got to survive in some way, shape, or form. As John Bradshaw said, 97% of families are dysfunctional and the other 3% are effing liars. It's just the level of dysfunction, right? So when we build this identity, that is neurobiologically our number one addiction. We build all the neurochemicals to hold on to this identity. And my work, my private work, is people who are going to challenge their identity. So I work with a very limited amount of people a year, and that's for two reasons. One is because I qualify them, and the other is because there's not that many people who are willing to do what you were willing to do, which is to say, listen, this could blow up everything I believe about who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And to crash that down is the only way to live in my belief system, the only way to live in harmony with your soul in whatever form that takes is by really willing to question what it is you've held as true. And so you're doing that and going into the evolution 2.0 is like, I know that that's why we became friends. I mean, we knew each other before that, but it's that willingness to go, you know what? I might be completely nuts here. So let's dive into this. And then you and I have had conversations that are about all kinds of obscure things.
Yes.
Right? From whether it's myth or religion or science, for that reason that we're both like, that's what I love about our conversations. We're both willing to go, oh, I might be wrong. Ooh, I get to talk to Perry. This is exciting. It's rare, mate. I really want you to get that this is rare. What you do is an act of courage that is fueled by curiosity. And if you don't have courage fueled by curiosity, you're not getting to an outcome called love. Did you hear that, everybody, when I said that? It's really important. If you don't have courage fueled by curiosity, you're not operating out of love. You're operating out of your ego trying to be right.
Well, that's why I have you here. That's the conversation I want to have. So break down the emotional source code.
Mm-hmm.
And so take us to the foundations. I mean,
Okay.
I think you just started with your most fundamental premise of Dov Baron and the whole entire world that courage fueled by curiosity equals love.
Yes. And access to that love requires you to have courage fueled by curiosity. So everything else is conceptual love rather than actual agape love.
Yes. And I had my favorite professor of all time when I was in college. He asked the class, he said, what's the greatest virtue of all? And people put out all these different answers like loyalty and love was definitely on the list,
Mm-hmm.
and intelligence and honesty and all those kind of things. And he goes, well, there's one you guys forgot and it's more important than all of them. And he goes, it's courage. Because if you don't have the courage, none of the other ones are worth anything. So totally agree with you. So start the building blocks. Like how do you get to emotional source code from there?
Right.
How do you build the structure? How does it work?
So I'll lay out the structure for everybody so that it becomes as clear as I can possibly lay it out. And it's 5 levels up, 5 levels down. So the 5 levels up are this. You come into the world and, at a biological level, you got DNA. But we used to believe in the primacy of DNA. We used to think that you are your DNA. That was the concept. And then we realized that's not actually true. So you have the DNA, some of it is switched on, some of it is switched off, and some of it's switched on permanently, and some of it's not permanently, and it can change based on epigenetics, the environment you're in.
Yep.
So at the base of your emotional source code is what I will call, just for this argument, for this understanding, is your emotional DNA. That's your emotional source code. That is the emotional DNA you got by being born into the place you were born, at the time you were born, in the situation you were born, in the lunatic asylum called your family. So, it's your mom, it's your dad, it's your siblings, it's your faith, it's your culture, it's all those things that's given to you. It's not, you didn't work it out. It's just like, okay, this is what it is. However, you soak in the environment And out of that environment, that epigenetic environment is called meaning. You give the situation meaning. That's level 2, the anatomy of meaning. So the base, we have emotional source code. Directly above it, we have the anatomy of meaning. Here's the meaning I'm giving this situation. And that's really interesting, even at that level, is because you can have a sibling who's really close to you in age. And as I always say, you can have the same family and different parents. People go, how is that possible? Because the reality for that family can be completely different in a year. So I have a sibling who's like completely in denial of my childhood. Well, of course he is. He's 10 years younger than me. Like he had a fight with me, pissed off at me because of the things I was saying about my childhood. And he's like, that just never happened. And I go, you're absolutely right. It didn't happen for you. Didn't exist in your time. You know, you talk about how poor we were. I go, did you remember having a kid? Do you remember the family having a cow when you were a kid? He goes, yeah. We didn't. Do you remember that there was always food on the table? Yeah. We didn't. Like, you know, and I just went through these things that just, it's a different reality. And those are just the factual things. Then there's the emotional environment of who your mother is, who your father is, and all those things. So you give meaning to the emotional DNA. That becomes the epigenetic that changes how you see what it is. Third level up. So now we've got emotional source code. That's just what it is. It just is what it is. You don't get any choice in that. Then you've got the anatomy of meaning, which is how you're interpreting this DNA. Out of that, you have to form an identity in order to survive. And that's exactly how it's built in the formative years. The identity says, in order for me to survive this environment, I need to be X, Y, or Z. But I can't be A, B, or C. So you build an identity out of that. It's not who you are, it's elements of who you are. That identity is the central hub of everything that goes on in your reality from there on in, because you start building the neurochemical pathways based on that evaluate that and reinforce it over and over again, more and more receptors on the cells for that neurochemical cocktail. Out of that identity, you must, of course, build the belief systems that support the identity. And when you have a paradigm of those belief systems, you get a value. So you've got a value system built on belief systems built on the identity. So now we've got beliefs and values above identity. And at the top level, above that, is those beliefs and values must determine your behavior. So your behavior is now simply a result of that. So people will come along and say, well, I need to change my behavior about X and Y. And I go, good luck. It isn't going to happen. And they go, why is it my beliefs? And I go, yeah. So they go, so I should do some belief work. And I go, yep, you should probably do that. Is that going to change me? It is, but not permanently. It's going to give, it's like going to a seminar and you get the rah-rah and you're like, yes, I can do this. And, you know, and then 3 days later, the suntan's worn off and you're like, oh, okay, I'm back to my same old nonsense. So we don't change unless we deal with the identity, but we can't deal with the identity without examining the meaning we've given things. So it's a stack up: emotional source code, anatomy of meaning, identity, beliefs and values, and then behavior. But it's also a stack down for change, which is I can't change the behavior unless I examine the beliefs and values. I can't change the beliefs and values unless I examine and I'm willing to be curious about my identity that is a construct. And I can't look at that unless I'm willing to examine the meaning I've given anything and everything, which is what you did when you jumped into evolution 2.0, right? You examined meaning. Most people will never go there. But the only way to examine meaning is you have to tell the truth about the emotional source code. What does that mean? It means your mom and dad were not angels. They're not God and goddess. That is true at a philosophical level. You rely on them entirely. They are the God and goddess. They tell you why the grass is green, why the sky is blue, tell you go to sleep, you're not tired. They tell you to wake up, you are tired. Tell you don't eat and you're hungry. Tell you to eat when you're not hungry. They have all the power. So of course they're God and goddess. And if you hold them in that framework, you never you never evolve. And so until you can question that environment and see them as flawed humans, just like everybody else, who maybe were doing some really messed up stuff, but maybe not because they woke up in the morning and go, oh, I wonder how we can fuck up Perry today. They probably just woke up and went, we're going to try and do what we do because we've only got one model that we know, and that's our parents. And now you, mom and dad, are going to have a fight about whose model is better. And we'll work out something. And the kids grow up in that. By doing that, by looking at the identity and the structure they came from, you get to understand that yours is made up too. And from there, you're empowered to make up your own through deep curiosity. It gives you the courage through the curiosity to then go, well, if I acted out of love from this place, like what would happen? I suddenly see, in my case, not the truth for everybody else, that my father was a narcissist. I can fully understand that. I'm stopped chasing him as my hero anymore. He's a narcissist. I get it. But I also have compassion for how he became a narcissist because he had to live with his mom and dad, and I met them. And they were whacked. So I'm not holding any false expectations of him as suddenly becoming a parent who gives a crap because he didn't. But I also can have compassion for him. I can hold both at the same time. So that's the broad overview.
So what was your crucible? When did you have to brave the destruction of your identity?
Truth of the matter is that it's happened multiple times, but each time it was kind of like cracking the shell of Humpty Dumpty. But I ran around with the polyfiller. And said, hold on a second. Whoa, let's just glue that back together until June 1990. And in June 1990, by that time, I was the most successful I'd been up until that point. And I was an adrenaline junkie. That was my high. I got to feel alive by doing crazy shit. And in June 1990, I was free climbing up by Whistler, which is in British Columbia, close to where the 2010 Olympics were. And at 120 feet, which is about 12 stories, I reached for a rock. That rock dislodged a far bigger rock that hit me in the face and sent me hurtling onto the boulders below and smashed me to pieces. That, everybody says, well, that must have really changed you. No, it didn't. No, it didn't. It smashed me to pieces. It destroyed my face. I've had 10 reconstructive surgeries, but no, it didn't. Because when people would say, how you doing? I would say, I'm great. I'm coming back through teeth that were wired shut. Right?
Wow.
In fact, I fell in June of that year, and in November of the same year, I went bungee jumping 140 feet off the Nanaimo Bridge with my jaw wired closed. That's how crazy I was. So it didn't change me at all. That's called, that moment there is where there is potential for change, but it's not change. People have the heart attack. Oh, I'm going to change my life, but they don't. I got more embedded in my ego of being this identity, which is I'm from poverty. I'm from, I'm an ex-boxer, ex-martial artist, bodybuilder. You can't keep me down. I've started businesses on 3 continents. I'm indestructible. It embedded that until I would go out with my mates on a Saturday night. And they were great. They'd come pick me up and take me out, and I'd be having this great time, but I wasn't. I'd be faking it. I'd be miserable. I was depressed, but I'd put on the jokes and I cracked, and then I'd be that person that, you would hear about a suicide and you'd go, I never saw it coming. That would have been me. But on this particular night, I'd gone out with the lads and I'd had a laugh, and I'd actually laughed. Like it was real. I wasn't faking it. And I thought, maybe I'm coming back. This is great. And I walked up the back steps into my kitchen, opened the door, and the light from outside on the porch illuminated the floor. And on the floor, there was garbage everywhere. There were empty cans. There was meat packages, there was coffee grinds, there was kitty litter. It smelled atrocious. And that spark of hope and of joy that I'd had as opening the door was instantaneously turned into rage. Not anger, rage, fury. I knew who the culprit was. I wanted to find them. I wanted to kill that culprit. And I marched around the house and walked into the living room. And there's the culprit on the couch, curled up, all comfy, relaxed. Oh my goodness. And I'm enraged. I lift my hand to strike. And then as my hand's up in the air, I'm not a violent person. I know that. My center of my being goes, no. And instead, I scoop up my cat into my arms and I pull him close to me. And he's cold and he's stiff and he's dead. The chaos in my kitchen was because he'd had some massive distemper attack. And I fell to my knees and I began to weep. I began to weep for a cat that wasn't mine, that I didn't really, I didn't dislike it, but I didn't really care about it. So why was I weeping so sadly, so deeply, like not crying, but weeping? And about, mustn't have been more than 2 or 3 minutes in, I realized I'm crying because I died. I, the identity, has smashed on the rocks and I can't pretend anymore. That was the moment. Not the falling off. The falling off was 9 months before, a full gestation period before I realized I can't put Humpty Dumpty together again because I don't want to be Humpty Dumpty, but I don't know who to be. I don't know who to be. And that was the beginning of the inquiry that took another 9 months of me digging deep into this false identity, me digging deep into curiosity that was fueled by pain, not just courage, but by pain, in that I knew I could not live like this any longer and that I would suicide if I couldn't do it. And that there was a moment when I went, I can't live with this anymore. And I wondered, like, I've already done 20 years of work. I'd been in therapy. I traveled the world and studied with different spiritual masters. I studied Gnostic and Coptic Christianity, Kabbalah, Vedanta, Buddhism, the Tao. And I'm saying, I can't live with me? Who is the I saying I can't live with me? And what is the me I can't live with that I'm considering suicide? And that question made me look at the identity. I couldn't live with that identity anymore. Who was I underneath that was the journey I was going to go up on. And it was not an easy journey, but that was the crucible. That I knew my life in the form that I'd known it had come to an end.
So what scared you the most about that? What was threatening?
Everything. What was threatening about it was that I had sold the world who I was. And now I had to announce that I was a liar, at least to myself. I have to say that that's not who I am. I remember a friend of mine coming to see me during this 9 months of where I was coming back, like I'd fallen to my knees. And my friend said, when are you going to get back on stage? When are you going to start speaking again? When are you going to start working with people again? And I go, I'm not. I am not doing that again. And about a year later, he came to an event, and of course, I'm on stage speaking. And I'm talking to people about how they can possibly work with me. And Mark is his name. He comes up to me and he goes, I thought you weren't doing this anymore. I go, I'm not. He goes, Dov, I just saw you on stage and inviting people to work with you. I go, nope. And he goes, are you lying to me? Or are you telling me that I'm having a hallucination? I go, no, the person you knew who did that doesn't exist anymore. I'm asking the same thing, but from a completely different place. What drove the identity before, and this was what was very hard to give up, this is what was terrifying to give up, was that I was the hero, that I was going to be the savior. And I'm not the hero, and I'm not the savior. I cannot save anybody. I can catalyze, I can facilitate, but I can't save anybody. That was my childhood identity. I was trying to save my mother. That had just transformed into my adult life. The wounds of your formative wounds, you may tell yourself they're different. They're transmuted into something that you call an adult behavior, but it's still driven by the same emotional pain until you confront it.
When was the first glimmer of the real Dove Baron, and how did you recognize it?
Oh, that's a good question. The first glimmer, I don't know that there's an actual, maybe there is an actual moment in time, but I can remember an event when I recognized it. And
Yeah.
that was before I'd fallen on a Wednesday night, I would hold an open event downtown Vancouver, and anybody could come. It was like $10 or whatever. You could come and you could sit, and then I would speak for about 20 minutes, and then I would just throw it open to questions. In the front row, there was always this lady, Mary, lovely lady. I was 31, 32 at the time when before I fell, and she would have been about late 40s. And she would always sit front and center. She would always be in that front center seat. She would be early there, and she always had great questions. And she was very kind and very gentle and deeply, on a journey. And I ended up working with her before I fell, and she became a private client. And of course, then after I fell, I didn't see anybody for a while. And she came back as a client.
Hmm.
Like somehow she found out I was, and she started coming. And so she booked an appointment where she came in. And at the end of the session, she goes, I said, how was your session? She goes, it was really great. And I said, oh, good. Okay. And I said, she said, can I tell you something? And I said, yeah. She goes, do you know why I used to come on a Wednesday night to see you? And I said, no. And she goes, I was touched by two things: how powerful you were and how well you knew yourself. I'd never met anybody who knew themselves as well as you did. And I said, oh, okay. She goes, but I need to tell you something, but don't be offended. I promise I won't be offended. I promise. I said, what's that? She goes, I don't think you know who you are anymore.
Hmm.
I said, oh, that's interesting. I'm not offended. Don't worry. And she goes, and I said, well, just from your position, do I seem the same amount of power, less power, more power, whatever it is? She goes, that's what I don't understand. You seem more powerful. And I said, Mary, that's because I don't know who the hell I am. And she goes, what do you mean? I said, because I don't know who I am because it's not a fixed post. I'm going to keep returning to my center, and I recognize that I'm always off center. And I've got to keep making those little adjustments every single day. And as long as I don't cling to who I am, I know that I'm going to be good. I know that I'm going to be on target with my soul. I don't know who I am because that would be an identity that I can't cling to anymore. That was the moment I got it. Oh, that's who Dov is. Dov is not the identity. Dov is the person who has the ability to show up in this moment, to be fully present in this moment or not, and then correct the course.
So, how do you find the center? What
Well,
does the center look like?
well, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to return to the the old familiar curiosity. It's curiosity. I have to be willing to be courageous, fueled by curiosity in any given moment. And part of that is, so like I said, I was really looking forward to having this conversation with you because I love our conversations. But I'm also willing to show up in this conversation going, the Perry I know may not be the Perry who shows up. The Perry I know and my perceptions of Perry may not be who shows up. He might have had a fight with his missus. His kids might have pissed him off. He might have had a fight with his God. He might have had a battle going on internally about something else. And so I understand that that's not a fixed position either. So am I willing to be curious about the person in front of me in this moment? So when we showed up today, if I may, you looked a little tired. You looked
Hmm.
like things like you'd been fighting a little bit with something within you, something with something you were dealing with. And I'm paying attention to that. I'm paying attention to the micro cues that tell me that. Now, that's different than the Perry I sat with having dinner with on the Saturday night of the conference that we were there with our friend Ellen. Okay. Are they all you? Yes, they are. They're all aspects of you. But I have to be willing to show up with the aspect that shows up in this moment. And if I can do that, I can show up with curiosity, and I can show up with courage, and I can show up with compassion. And by the way, I can show up having my perception and it can be completely wrong. You go, no, I wasn't in that space. All right, fine. That's okay. Although I suspect that I wasn't wrong, but.
Okay, so she says to you, you're not, I don't think you're who you were anymore.
Yeah, don't think you know who you were anymore. Know who you are anymore.
And then what happened?
I just said, you're right. I don't. I have no idea who I am because I'm willing to be whoever I need to be in a given moment. And that's not morphing. So let's be clear. You go, oh, yeah, well, I'm good at that. I'm a chameleon. No, that's exactly the opposite. It's more of the same bullshit. No, I'm not doing that. I'm willing to access a deeper part of me to show up with what's needed in this given moment. If I'm sitting down with Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, I'm going to show up with whatever is needed in that moment. Whether I like them or dislike them is not the point. That's personality. I'm going to show it with what's needed to be shown up with.
So I want to take this I don't know where this is going to go, but I'm going to be a little dangerous.
Good. My favorite.
Last month, there's this debate between
Yes.
Biden and Trump.
Yes.
And while I was watching it, I was laughing my butt off. I thought it was a fun. Saturday Night Live could not have written a kookier script than that. But the next day, as I thought about it and I read about it and processed it, I was livid.
Mm-hmm.
But I had this little thought enter my mind, which was there has to be some way in which these two characters are a mirror of a population.
Absolutely.
And that is really scary. What do you think about that, Dov?
I just wrote a post on Twitter this morning where I asked the question, I said, is it me or did the most unpopular vice president in history suddenly become the lifeline of democracy? Right? How did that happen? Like that's called spin, but okay. But I also said, but let's also remember that this is a result of political apathy because you got Trump because people said, I'm not heard. You and I had this conversation before where when people said Trump was elected because he's a racist and the racists do it. No, they didn't. The people who voted for Obama voted for Trump. People go, really? Yeah, look it up. They did. They felt like no one was hearing them. And Obama said, hope and change. And they believed him. And he turned out to be a corporate Democrat. And I liked him. So let me not say I did like him, but I definitely didn't like a lot of things he did. Because that's how it works with politics. You don't have to agree with everything. But there was a lot of people felt not heard. And so they went, well, here's a guy who we thought was going to do it. So maybe we need somebody from outside of that world. And so they voted for Trump.
Yeah.
And a lot of people who voted for Trump the first time did not vote the second time for him because they realized, this is not for us either. They're not doing it. Yeah. So what you've got now is this Harris versus Trump. And really it's, what Trump is because he's shown you. And it won't get smaller. It'll get bigger. It'll just become more exaggerated. And you know what Harris is because she's the old system. But so this battle is a result of political apathy that is intellectual apathy. I wrote a piece around this recently. Intellectual, emotional, and spiritual apathy results in an authoritarian system because we're addicted to comfort. We get attached to comfort and we go, I don't want my good shit to go away. So I'm going to do what it is to protect my stuff. It's very primal psychology. And so I'm going to protect that. And so I'm going to blame the immigrants and I'm going to blame the people who are trans or whatever the hell a kid is. I'm going to blame these people so that I can hold on to this. And that creates a political apathy because then I don't have to make any big decisions. But if you come along and you say, I'll make those big decisions for you, that's called an authoritarian leader. Hmm. As I wrote about, I had a conversation with two friends of mine both ex-military, both who had done active service. One was living in Hungary and one was living in Turkey. Now, I don't know if you know, I know you do, Perry, but people who live in those countries are living under an authoritarian leader. And I said, I'm really fascinated. Tell me how it is living under authoritarian leadership when you are ex-US military who fought for, quote, freedom. And they go, it's great. And I said, okay, tell me how. Like, I'm really, like, I'm, now you're challenging me. This is good. Tell me how. And they said, it's stable. Political, emotional, mental apathy. You're now calling freedom the thing that is your comfort. And nothing changes in the world via comfort. Everything that changes in the world is via discomfort. But if you're avoiding discomfort, you will accept apathy. And if you'll accept apathy and somebody comes along and says, I'll take care of the big decisions for you, you don't have to worry about it, then we go right along with it. And that's what we're seeing right now. They are, so for me, the extreme left feeds the extreme right. The extreme right feeds the extreme left. They're the same, it's the same shit. And as I posted on Twitter today, when I did that comment, I posted, Harris and Biden, and I put a picture of RFK Jr., Marianne Williamson, and what's his name? Professor Cornel West. And I said, there are other choices. Here's the deal, though. Don't wait for somebody that you agree with everything, because that's not how politics works. But don't vote against. Find something to vote for. Because if you vote for Trump, then you have the right as a patriot to criticize Trump. If you vote against Trump, you don't have any room to criticize Harris. If you vote against Harris, you don't have room to criticize. It's understanding that you've got to make a choice. And then, so if you vote for RFK Jr. or you vote for Cornel West or you vote for Marianne Williamson, you can say, listen, you said this and you're not doing that. I voted for you based on this. You have a voice, but the rest of it is just apathy. And so this is, again, thinking about this from the emotional source code, you're voting based on the identity that you hold dearest. But that identity is not, it's not real. It's whatever was the coping mechanism. Once you identify the emotional source code, once you identify the identity you're holding on to, suddenly your political views just start falling apart. So when somebody says to me, are you a Democrat or a Republican? I'm like, yep, no. There are things about Republicans that I really like. There are things about Democrats I really like. There are things I dislike enormously. It's neither, it's none, because I understand that it's an evolving situation. That's what we have to do. We have to be far more emotionally, mentally, and politically engaged. And we can't do that from a place of truth without courage fueled by curiosity that gives us the love and compassion we need to confront whatever needs to be confronted.
So I'm thinking about your statement that people are really just optimizing for comfort.
Mm-hmm.
Comfort doesn't change anything. And that's ringing completely true in all of my work in the medical system.
Oh, yeah, you're going to get pushed back every day because you're saying, I'm going to piss off you comfortable people, right? Ezra, our friend Ezra, like, she's the queen of it. It's why we both love her.
Yes.
It's like how have they not, like, she's the RFK of the cancer world. Like, why is nobody taking her out? Because she's like pushing against the comfort.
And you know what? Azra, because I know her very well now. We've been friends for 4 years. We've been on all kinds of trips and conferences and coffees and conversations. She is a perpetually uncomfortable person. She is grieving her patients, her husband, the state of the medical system, and she is not willing to sit in a place of comfort until she accomplishes what she wants. Now, she has comfortable things in her life. I'm not saying she's laying in a bed of nails, but she is not satisfied until we change some of these things that are abusing patients. And she told me a story of a colleague of hers who she felt sold out. They took a position
Hmm.
at an institution where they're just kind of agreeing to go along with the status quo.
Yep.
And she was desperately disappointed that somebody she knew and cared about had sold out.
Yep.
And I believe that in whatever profession you're in, because all the professions are 50 years behind state of the art, not just
Hmm.
a few. If you're going to change the status quo, you're going to be uncomfortable. You're going to have to make discomfort your friend.
I talk about this from the point of view of the emotional source code of, listen, you want the change because you want things to be better, right? And they go, yeah. And I say, here's what I want you to know. I'll use the word enlightenment, but it could be the word transformation, whatever
Hmm.
word you're comfortable with. Enlightenment, transformation, is a destructive process. It's not all and lights from heaven. It's a destructive process. And if you can't allow yourself to find comfort in that destruction, you are just going to be in pain the entire time. And you referred to a conversation that we had with Azra when she was here in Vancouver, and you had that event where I asked questions. And one of the things that was very clear to me was the amount of grief this woman was in, the loss of her husband, who was also an oncologist, the loss of her daughter's friend, and and all these patients and who she had known at a very personal level. And I remember asking her, most people are halted by grief. It's devastating, and grief. My quote is, grief is an ocean of unpredictable tides. You never know when it will wash over you.
Hmm.
And she has a lot to be in grief about. And she talked about how she and her very close friend who had lost so many people were fueled by grief to make the difference. That's such a great example of what you're talking about. Is she used that discomfort to fuel, to give her the courage to be curious about these fixed ideas of what it is, what it has to be. And you and I watched her when we were in LA, and she sits on a panel with a bunch of traditional oncologists and like pisses them off to the max. And they say
Yeah.
things like, "Well, that's a very what do they call it? A negative attitude towards the." She's like, "No, but this is objectively, this is what it is. Like, we're not going to make it better by pretending it's different. It's not. It's not making a difference." And I'm like for me, she's a freaking superhero, right? She's
Yeah.
but you're right. It's that willingness to sit in that discomfort. And I know that when I sit in the discomfort, I don't feel good about it like anybody else. It's uncomfortable. That's why it's called discomfort. But I know on the other side of that is always enlightenment, right? I remember saying something jokingly to my daughter in law about my 3-year-old granddaughter. It was a joke. It was and I said something, and I immediately felt like, oh my God, there's weight on my chest, like an elephant on my chest. And I said, I know that I was just joking, and I know that I was joking, but I can't believe I just said this about a human being who I adore.
Hmm.
Even in a joke, like, that is so not acceptable. And I said, and my daughter-in-law said, well, it's okay. And I said, no, it's not okay. I have to sit with the discomfort. I have to sit with the pain of what I just said as a trying to be a funny guy identity. I have to sit with that pain because I need healthy shame. And people don't understand that. Unhealthy shame is guilt magnified. And if you want guilt, just join the Catholic Church. You can go and do a confession. They'll give you 3 Our Fathers and 4 Hail Marys, and you can go out and murder somebody next week or do whatever the hell you do again. And you'll get some more next week. And as long as you tip, it's okay. As opposed to healthy shame, which is me sitting with the discomfort, the self-disgust at the behavior to such a degree that I will never allow myself to go to that place again, because that is misaligned with my soul. That is a false identity. I am a funny guy. I make people laugh. I don't always intend to, but I'm a funny guy. We have some good laughs together. But when I'm doing that as an identity, then all bets are off. I can be vicious. I'm not going to do that. That's unacceptable to my soul. So I need to sit in the discomfort of healthy shame. So when people ask me things, I'll say, listen, here's my healthy shame. And I'll tell them something like, I walk around and it's a weight on my back. And they go, but you did that 40 years ago. Yep. And I'll happily carry that rather than put it down, because I will never allow that behavior in myself again. She sits in that discomfort in a way that I have never met before. And that's what makes her a fucking superhero. She's amazing.
Dov, what would you say to the person who listens to this and they recognize, man, he's talking to me?
Mm-hmm.
And I've been addicted to too much comfort, and I've been defending the status quo. And boy, yeah, I'd like to be one of those changers, but scares the crap out of me. What do you say to that person?
First of all, congratulations. You recognize that it scares the crap out of you, because you will not change unless it scares you. Human beings are not changed by comfort. They're changed by discomfort. And when you're confronted with that discomfort, you'll do one or two things. Retreat into the corner of comfort. Well, one of three things. You'll retreat into the corner of comfort. You'll stay in that stalled position, frozen. And the problem with that is that it'll all look good on the outside. You'll collect another million, another billion. You'll buy another Rolls Royce. You'll get the wife a new set of tits. You'll trade wives or whatever it is. You'll get yourself a penis extension or a facelift, and you'll do all the things that make it look good. But inside, you'll know you're dying. That's the middle phase. Or you will change. And that's terrifying, because you have spent your life selling the world who you are. And now it feels out of integrity that I sold them this. No, because you get to be more integral. You get to be integral with your soul. And so what I would say to that person is this. It's very simple. Is this who you want to be when you die? You will leave a legacy. And so this is what I say to my clients. I ask you a question. I'll ask you, Perry. Have you been to a funeral?
Yes.
Of course you have, right? And have you noticed that when you go to a funeral, that they canonize the dead?
Yeah.
Right. People are turned into saints. Even if they were a-holes, they're turned into saints. Right?
Yeah.
So I remember going to a funeral. A friend of mine said, will you come to this funeral for my dad? Now, I knew this guy and I knew his dad. I knew them well. I knew what kind of guy his dad was. I knew that he had tied my friend up to the boiler and beat him with the Hot Wheels track when he was a kid. I knew this guy, right? And my friend said, I got to go to my dad's funeral. I don't really want to go, but would you come and support me? And I said, to support you, yes, but I'm not sitting in the front. He goes, no, I don't want to sit in the front. I want to sit in the back. Okay. So in the front, there's a person doing a eulogy, and they tell a story about old Joe, the guy who died, about how he loaned money to the person next door when he was like in his 30s. He loaned money. He didn't have a lot of money, but he loaned money to the person next door to pay their rent. And he never asked for that money back. What a guy. What a guy. And everybody's like, oh, Joe. Yeah. Saint Joe. Meanwhile, in the back, my friend and I are sitting there. And my friend's like, that ain't the only fucking story. There's no story about the Hot Wheels tracks or how he beat my mother or how he beat my siblings or how mean and cruel he was and how he never would give me a penny. Those stories don't get done. And so what I asked somebody sitting there listening to this and going, maybe I want to do this, maybe I don't. I'm kind of afraid. My answer is this. I want you to think about your funeral and think about how they'll canonize you. And that's great. Think about it. Write it down. Write that eulogy that you would want them to say. And ask yourself, is that the truth? And if you go, yeah, it is. Okay, great. Fantastic. Now my question is to you, like my friend Vincent and I sitting in the back, what are the whispers? What are the whispers that you can't live with? That if you had to come back in that moment, you would be so deeply ashamed of. What are the whispers? And right now, allow yourself to do what it takes to not have those whispers. And so you might say, well, I'm a good guy and I've changed. I'm going to give you an example from mine. So in my eulogy, they say Dov was a courageous man. He was a father to men. He helped human beings. He elevated the souls of humans. He was courageous and he was curious and a bunch of other stuff. All right. And are those things true? Yes. Are they exclusively true? Hell no. I go, okay, so what's the whispers? And I go, well, he was a coward. Well, I'm not. My ego can defend that and go, no, I'm not. Have I been cowardly? Yes. Have I changed that? Yes. Okay. So I can defend all of those whispers by saying I've evolved. So I said, how do I get myself to live in integrity with what I once said at that front and it be absolutely true? What has to happen? And I said, well, that I was a coward. Nope, that's not going to work. I said, hold on, whose mouth do I have to put it in? And I went, if I put that in the mouth of my grandchildren, if my grandchildren say he was a coward, will that hit? Yes. But will it hit hard enough? For me, the answer was no. For me. I said, what does it need for it to really hit so that it holds me to a line of integrity that is unwavering? For me, it's an expletive. It's my grandchildren looking at each other and going, he was a fucking coward. Now, that's not true for anybody else. You use whatever works for you. But that there meant every time I step into a situation and I don't want to do it, or I'm afraid, or I'm confronted by something that I don't want to do, I hear the whisper, that healthy shame, the whisper of my grandchildren sitting together at the front row and saying, there was this time when he was confronted to do this and he didn't do it because he was a fucking coward. I'm like, nope, got to do it. That's how I want to live. My question to the person listening to this who says, I think I want to be that person is, how do you want to live? What are the whispers you want to confront? You want to cancel? What is the mark you want to leave in the world? What is your legacy that's got nothing to do with money? What is the legacy of your soul on the souls of others? Because my purpose is this is me, it's Dov, it's not you, is to impact the lives of people whose names I will never know and who will never know my name. If you're listening to this, I don't know your name. You may never have heard of me before. And maybe it impacts the way you are with your children or your grandchildren, and they'll never know my name, and that's great. Live your life with impact, an impact you can be proud of. And that's not just writing a check for a charity. That's being courageous, fueled by courage, so that you can act out of love.
If somebody wants to reach out to you, how do they do that?
Thanks for asking, mate. Appreciate it. My website is easy. It's my name, DovBaron.com, DovBaron.com. You can write to me directly. I know it's insane. I give my private email out. It's Dov@DovBaron.com. So you can write to me. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. And the main place I hang out is on LinkedIn, where I write a newsletter every Tuesday. I post every single day. And I, of course, as Perry said, I have a podcast, The Dov Baron Show, where you'll hear me interview amazing human beings like, I don't know, this guy, what's his name? Mary Marshall. Yeah, that's the guy. Perry Marshall. And others, including Ezra, by the way, who we talked about. So you can find me in all those places. But, reach out to me. I am here to be of service. If there's something I can do for you, even if it's not to work with me privately, even if it's something, because I do the emotional source code for organizations. I wrote the emotional source code of the United States. I also did one of England. So it's national, it's organizational, and it's personal. So I do those as well. But if I can help you in some way, and you're just like, oh, I wonder if Dov can help me, reach out. I'll make myself available to you. Might not be tomorrow, but I'll do it right away as soon as I can.
Thank you, Dov Baron.
Thank you, my friend. It's always a pleasure and an honor.